Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We're here with Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. Many of you are already intimately familiar with Dr. Kastrup's work, but for those of you who are not, Dr. Kastrup is the executive director of the Essentia Foundation and an outspoken proponent of metaphysical idealism, which is the notion that reality is essentially mental. He has a Ph.D. in philosophy, specializing in ontology and philosophy of mind, and another Ph.D. in computer engineering, specializing in reconfigurable computing and artificial intelligence. As a scientist, Dr. Kastrup has worked for the European Organization for Nuclear Research, which many of you may know as CERN, as well as the Philips Research Laboratories. He's published numerous academic papers and books, and his ideas have been featured on Scientific American, the Institute of Art and Ideas, the blog of the American Philosophical Association, and Big Think, among others. Dr. Kastrup, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to add anything to to the introduction I just gave, then feel free to do so before we start.
No, it's pretty complete. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you. So without further ado, we'll start going into the questions. So to start out here, we have a few questions from Spicy. We'll start with the third question here because I think it's probably the most basic one and a good introduction to our AMA here. What would you say is the relationship between the brain and the body?
I think the brain and the body are one entity. There is no brain without a body, and a body without a brain doesn't do much. I think this separation of the body into different organ systems, it's nominal. It's something we do for convenience because it, helps to specialize our education. It gives us some understanding about the functions that the body performs, and each organ system being sort of specialized on one particular function. But all of this is nominal. Ultimately, what we have is a living body that metabolizes, and we divide it up into segments to facilitate our learning and communication. But ultimately, I think there is just a body, and I think the body is the representation, the appearance of a particular type of mental process in nature, a kind of a dissociative process, which, when observed, looks like what we call biology or metabolism or a living body. But the process as it is in itself, before or independent of being observed, I think that process is a mental process of a dissociative character.
Okay, and another one of their questions is, some idealists in the past have had radically different concepts of time, space, change, relations, etc. How does your model fare with these concepts?
I think recently, not only philosophy, but science itself is getting to a place where we can no longer um, have any confidence. In fact, there is every indication to the contrary. We cannot have any confidence that space and time are a sort of objective scaffolding of the objective world out there. Since relativity theory in the 20th century, the idea of a block universe became very difficult to discard, and that, of course, uh, has a bearing on our understanding of time as some kind of linear progression along a given dimension. The block universe lets you see that, okay, it's not necessarily linear in the way we are used to think of it. What can be past for one observer can be present for another observer. So, does the past really is the past just an abstraction, something that no longer exists? Because if another observer can be in the past, that past can be the other observer's present, then there is a sense in which the past is always there. And then from the perspective of that observer, we are in the future. We are in his future. So maybe the future is also always there. So that's the block universe idea, which we are having to get used to already for a century now. And more recently, in our attempts to reconcile relativity with quantum theory, specifically quantum field theory, and arrive at some kind of unified field theory, the victim of that is time as well. Time is now more and more being regarded as something that is emergent. It's not a natural absolute. It's not a pre-existing scaffolding out there in nature. It emerges out of quantum processes. And there have been physicists who have even attempted to rewrite all the equations, all the fundamental equations of physics without t, without time. And guess what? That is possible to do. So even science is questioning our intuition about time. Neuroscience shows us that our subjective experience of time is just that. It's extremely subjective. There is very little objectivity in it. Now, this is all recent. If you go back to the past of Western philosophy, since Kant and Schopenhauer, there has been this serious hypothesis being discussed, according to which space and time is just a kind of internal cognitive scaffolding. It's a category of experience, a modality of experience. It's our own way to sort of tease things apart so we can cognize and make sense of them. And in that sense, space and time are within us. They are part of us. They are not, again, an objective scaffolding out there in the world. So, and if you go even further back to Eastern philosophy, they would say the same as well, that space and time are completely relative. They are not absolutes, they are not objective realities. So that's something that is becoming very hard to escape now. My own view is that space time is indeed a modality or a category of experience of an outer, of a dissociated aspect of a extended mind. And we being these dissociated aspects. So we sort of create space time as part of our evolved cognitive apparatus in order to make sense of the world in which we are immersed. But this space and this time, they are not really up there objectively. And I think that's completely consistent with idealism. The difficulty is that you cannot argue logically without presupposing space time, because space and time are already presupposed in language itself, and they are certainly presupposed in a lot of our logic. So if I am to open my mouth and say anything about the reality as it is outside space time, I will grind immediately to a halt. I cannot say anything about it. All we can say is that what we see from within space time, what we argue from within the assumption of space time, is a reflection of something that probably exists outside space time. But we only have access to its reflection, to its projection within the dimensions of space time. And only on the basis of this projection, of this shadow world, can we make arguments and use our logic. That's the difficulty. But fundamentally, I think idealism is totally consistent with the now almost inescapable notion that space and time are not objective realities.
All right. And then we'll take one more question from Spicy. If matter is what mental processes of the universal consciousness looks like across a dissociative boundary, do you think human consciousness is a conglomerate of mental processes of the universal consciousness that builds up until it's eventually its own consciousness? If so, what makes it dissociative, or why does it form its own conscious self? And if not, and the individual consciousness is logically prior to the matter we can see when we look at it, why does it appear individuated by matter across a dissociative boundary, anyways?
Um, I think
That
we
was a
have
bit
to
of a
make a
mouthful, but
distinction. I think we have to make a distinction between separate consciousnesses and particular sets of contents of consciousness. When we refer to consciousness itself, we are referring to what some modern analytic philosophers call core subjectivity, pure ipseity, a sort of a subjective point of view attached to a phenomenal space. Now, that is not content dependent. The contents of that consciousness or its particular patterns of excitation are something that are reducible to the consciousness itself, to the subjectivity itself. So the claim in analytic idealism is that ultimately there is really just one consciousness in the sense that there is only one core subjectivity. So the core subjectivity in me is the same core subjectivity in you, in my cat, and in whatever mind underlies the inanimate universe as a whole. But each of these segments of the universal core subjectivity can have their own contents, their own experiential contents. They are all patterns of excitation of the same underlying core subjectivity, which is a unitary, only one. But the contents themselves can sort of congregate around different nuclei of experience, different alters, if you will. So dissociation is something that is applicable to the contents. When there is a dissociative boundary, you have a separation between two sets of contents of consciousness, two sets of experiences, two different patterns of excitation of the underlying core subjectivity. But dissociation does not entail or imply that the core subjectivity itself is fragmented. It is not. If it were, we would have a huge problem in analytic idealism to construct a coherent argument. We would have to face the combination problem, for instance, which is a technical problem that people discuss in analytic philosophy. So the core subjectivity is always one and the same. Dissociation applies to particular contents of experience that become inferentially isolated. Now, to get some to develop some intuition about this, you can do the following thought experiment. If I and you were locked into two separate but ideal sensory deprivation chambers. So we couldn't see anything, we couldn't smell anything, touch anything, hear anything. We are both we are both each in one ideal sensory deprivation chamber. And then both you and me, while we are in there in that chamber, we would both suddenly go completely amnesic for a moment at least, for a few seconds. Now, when we are completely amnesic in an ideal sensory deprivation chamber, we would have no experiences of the ordinary sense. The only thing that would be left is our core subjectivity, that I, that subject, which is not perceiving anything and cannot remember anything. So, for at least a moment, the subjectivity in me and the subjectivity in you would both be naked, and they would also reveal themselves to be exactly the same. I would feel exactly the same as you would feel under the conditions of this thought experiment, because all that would be left in both our consciousnesses would be the same naked, empty core subjectivity, pure I-ness, pure subjectivity. And then you can say, well, it's just two instances that are identical, like two cars of the same model, make, and year. They are identical, but they are still two. Well, that's spatial temporal thinking. From a qualitative perspective, which is a more fundamental perspective, if these two subjectivities are qualitatively identical, then they are also one. They are also one and the same. Because if I am feeling exactly the same as you are feeling, before we deploy our abstractions of space, time, and volume, and so on, uh, we would be effectively be one and the exact same entity. Because from the perspective of qualitative consciousness, if you feel exactly the same, then you are effectively the same. There is no other parameter for differentiation in there. So that thing that is left when you cannot perceive anything and when you cannot remember anything, that naked subjectivity, that is core subjectivity. And I would argue that is universal consciousness itself. That is what universal consciousness is from a first person perspective. From a third person perspective, you can visualize universal consciousness as empty space. But from a first person perspective, it is that core subjectivity, which Schopenhauer referred to as the one eye of the world that looks out from every creature. That's exactly what this is, that one eye of the world that then gets dressed up with a particular personal narrative, which we derive from memory, a particular set of abstractions about, I am a name, or I have this profession, and I am the son of so and so. So before all that comes in, there is only one subjectivity.
Okay. So we'll move on to another questioner. Foxo wanted to know about your theory of truth. How can we be sure that something is true? What does it even mean to be true, under your view?
Um, Depends on what we mean by truth, right? To have a theory of truth, we have to have a definition of it. In the mainstream today, we have the so called correspondence theory of truth. And the idea is if you make a statement in mind about a state of affairs of the world, then your statement will be true if it corresponds to whatever is the case in the world. And it will be untrue if it does not correspond to whatever in the case in the world. Notice that this theory requires a form of dualism. There is a mental statement in your mind, and there is a non mental state of affairs in the world out there. And when they match, then it's true. When they don't match, then it's false. The statement, I mean. Now, under idealism, you do not have this distinction between mind and non mind. So you cannot use the correspondence theory of truth without at least some adaptation, because everything is mental. But under analytic idealism, you still have, your mind, my mind, and mind at large, the mental processes that underlie the inanimate universe. So you can still have a adapted form of the correspondence theory of truth. If I, as a dissociated alter of universal consciousness, make a statement about something related to mind at large, if that statement corresponds to a verifiable state of affairs in mind at large, then that statement is correct. If it doesn't, then it's not correct. So you have a different form of dualism. Instead of a kind of substance dualism between mind and non mind, now you have the dualism of a dissociated mind and mind at large. And that can still ground a perfectly operational theory of truth.
Okay, so now we have a question from Be Here Now. They ask, is it not more likely that the world we perceive is a creation of mind at large rather than mind at large itself?
What's the difference? If all there is mind, then a creation of mind is that mind. Otherwise, you're assuming that mind will come up with something that is non mental. And the very point of analytic idealism is that that something does not exist, it's all mental. So the creation of mind at large is per force mind at large itself, creating. The creativity, the creative process of mind at large is a pattern of excitation of mind at large. It is creative in the sense that you can have one pattern of excitation instead of another, so that specific pattern of excitation that is the case has been created out of many, many, countless, maybe infinite possibilities. Mind at large perhaps could be oscillating under completely different harmonics, patterns of excitation, but it is doing it the way it is doing that. So this is creative. There is a choice being made for a manifestation of something that could be something else under a different choice. But that manifestation, that oscillation, is still mind at large and nothing but mind at large. Look, if you have um, a lake, you can have many different patterns of rippling in that lake. The wind may be blowing at different strengths or in different directions, and the surface of the lake will ripple in different ways, and it will construct totally different patterns of rippling. So that's creative. But at the end of the day, there is only the lake. A ripple is just the lake in movement, the lake under excitation. For the exact same reason, whatever mind at large creates, it is mind at large because it is a pattern of excitation of mind at large. It cannot be anything else.
All right, and they also ask, given the vast amount of data in support of psi phenomena and the fact that your theory provides a perfect framework for better understanding it, is this an area you may explore or write a book about, or is that maybe a job for someone else?
I wrote a chapter for an upcoming book called Consciousness Unbound, which is volume 3. You could regard it as volume 3 of the tomes that have been put out by DOPS at the University of Virginia, Ed Kelly and others. The first one was Irreducible Mind, and then Beyond Physicalism. And now this year there will be Consciousness Unbound. And I wrote a chapter for that book in which I do discuss psi phenomena. I don't talk often about it because it's not an area that I have studied, or to be honest with you, and this is not a put down. I'm not very interested in it. I don't know why. It's just my peculiarity. I think the ordinary is already so mysterious. It's a bottomless abyss of mystery, what is surrounding you right now. That we consider it banal is a cultural artifact. Um, it has nothing to do with the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is we do not have a clue what matter is, what space and time are. It's all tentative. We know how this stuff behaves, but we don't have much of a clue about what they really, really are and how they come to being. So you are surrounded in bottomless mysteries right now in your ordinary, banal life. And to me, that's the priority. That's where my attention goes because I'm surrounded by this mystery. Um, so there is little energy left for me to go into psi because um, only if you are sort of or if you are a recovering materialist that comes from that dead and logically unjustifiable or empirically unjustifiable perspective that we've solved all mysteries, which is just nonsensical. Only if you have that perspective, which then informs your feeling for banality, only then can you think that the mystery is restricted to psi, that we have to go to the non ordinary in order to find the mystery. um, I don't have that. I find the mystery staring at my microphone as I'm saying this right now. What is this microphone? What is this thing that, if I look close enough, disappears at the quantum level and turns into completely abstract fields, which are just theoretical tools we come up with to predict nature's behavior. And they are not at all what nature is, because if nature is a quantum field, then we don't know what it is, because we don't know what a quantum field is. As far as we know, it's a mathematical abstraction that helps us predict things. Nature behaves as if it were a field, whatever a field is. That's about it. The mystery is just impinging on our skin every second of the day. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the ordinary.
All right. So another questioner, who goes by Fems, asks, okay, so Donald Hoffman says we don't see reality as it really is, and only according to its fitness for us. Accordingly, what would you say planets in our solar system really are? Are they just rock, minerals, hydrogen, helium, or could they be conscious entities of some sort?
To when you ask the question, can planets be a conscious entity? What you probably mean is, can a planet have a dissociated conscious inner life of its own? Dissociated in the sense that it's a private conscious inner life, inaccessible to me and inaccessible to mind at large. In the same way that we have private conscious inner lives. I cannot read your thoughts, presumably you can't read mine, because we are dissociated from one another. So we are conscious in the sense of having this dissociated private inner life. So the question is, does a planet also have dissociated conscious private inner life? Now, when you ask that question, you're assuming that the planet exists as a thing separate from the other things, separate from the rest of the inanimate universe. And this is something linguistically so ordinary. We do this all the time in language. We talk about a phone, a car, a chair, a table. It's so ordinary in language that we've lost sight from the fact that beyond language, all these divisions are entirely nominal. They are entirely arbitrary. There is no such a thing as a planet. There is no such a thing as a phone. We delineate the boundaries of a planet and of a phone out of convenience, so we can refer to different aspects of the inanimate universe out there, so we can communicate. So we can buy a phone and go to the website and say, okay, I want this phone. So we place these divisions, these boundaries in nature out of convenience, but these are entirely nominal boundaries. They're arbitrary. If you say, well, a car really is a car, because the car is the thing that moves. So you define a boundary on the basis of functionality. But if you dig a little bit under the surface, you will see that this is completely untenable as a means to define boundaries. Because what makes the car move? Well, yeah, the spark plugs and the cylinders and the axle. Yeah, that's all true. But if you didn't have the atmospheric air to enable combustion and cool the engine, the car wouldn't move. If you didn't have the road that the tires can grip, the car wouldn't move. If you didn't have the gravity that pulls the car against the road so the tires can grip as the axle is turning, the car wouldn't move. So even on the basis of functionality alone, you very quickly realize that there is no car, there is no planet, there is no sun, there is no galaxy. These are all convenient separations that we make to talk about different aspects of the unitary inanimate universe. Only when it comes to living beings, we have very good grounds to place a separation. Because if I pinch my skin, I feel it. If I pinch the leather of the chair I'm sitting on right now, I don't feel it. If a photon hits my retina, I see it. If a photon hits the wall of my neighbor's house, I don't see it unless it's reflected and then hits my retina. So we clearly are separate entities on an ontological level. And this separation is, in my view, it arises out of dissociation. But for anything else, we can't even talk about a thing. So the very question, is the thing conscious in the sense of having private inner life? That very question sort of is off the table. It melts like butter under the sun because there is no thing to begin with. On the basis of what are you talking about a thing? Let's talk about a chair. Let's ask if a chair has a private conscious inner life of its own. Suppose it has. Now, what about one leg of the chair? Does it have a private conscious life of its own? Because you see, a leg is a thing as well. I can put a boundary between the leg and the rest of the chair. Or is a river conscious? And then you get to the river delta. Where does the river end and the ocean begin? So is the ocean plus the river conscious? You always get into these situations. Or is a mountain, a rock mountain conscious? And what about then if a little piece of the mountain sort of dislodges itself and comes tumbling down the mountain? Does that rock that became detached, does that acquire then a separate conscious inner life of its own, separate from the mountain? And does it then reunite with the mountain when it hits the bottom and stays touching the rest of the mountain? This is all arbitrary stuff. And the reason it's arbitrary stuff is because the division, the partitioning of the inanimate universe into separate inanimate objects is entirely nominal. So, no, I don't think my phone has a private conscious inner life of its own because I don't think my phone exists as a thing. What I call a phone is just a particular set of pixels of a much broader image that we call the inanimate universe as a whole. I do think the inanimate universe as a whole has a conscious inner life of its own, separate from mine because I'm dissociated from it. But the phone is just a set of pixels of that representation of the conscious inner life of the inanimate universe. And I arbitrarily draw a line around that set of pixels and I call it a thing. And we need to do that for operational reasons. But when we are discussing the primary questions, we have to see through the unexamined assumptions of our operational reasoning. We have to look one level below that, and one level below that, there are no things.
Okay, so their second question is the movie The Matrix is a visual analogy of simulation theory. Would you ever consider writing a script for a movie similar to the story you write in your book Dreamed Up Reality so that idealism can be understood and accepted by the mainstream as simulation theory is today?
I, I, I'm how to put it. I have very mixed feelings about the notion of simulation theory. There is one sense, and that's the sense the questioner is alluding to. There is one sense in which it's useful and compatible with idealism and even sort of makes idealism clearer. But there is another sense in which it has nothing to do with idealism and is even contradictory. And unfortunately, it is this latter sense that get pushed by people in academic philosophy today that I think are jokers. That I mean, it's ridiculous that public money pays for what some of these people are doing. And this latter sense is when you take the metaphor literally. When you say that there is another sort of material civilization, or at least we imagine that civilization as sort of physical like us, and they developed some computers, and then we think about our own computers, but much more evolved, and we are a kind of computer simulation of that other quasi material or meta material universe. Now, this I think is idiotic, not least because you're not solving anything, you're just postponing the problem. Because if you say, well, the nature of our being is we are simulations in some kind of meta computer, then what is the nature of the meta computer? What is the nature of the meta civilization that is simulating us? Are they themselves simulated? So there is a meta computer and a meta civilization, and this will never end. It's infinite regress. So I don't think this sense of simulation theory is helpful at all. I think it's completely useless, and it does a disservice to philosophy. But the other sense, which is the metaphorical interpretation, in which we say, well, what we call material things are not separate from mind at all. They are being created within a mind. So there is a sense in which it's a simulation, or there is a sense in which it's a transpersonal dream. So, in that sense, fine, we can talk about simulation. I would rather talk about a transpersonal dream because it sort of makes clear what the nature of the thing is. It's mental. And when we use the simulation metaphor, we sort of inadvertently leave open what the nature of the thing may be. It may be material or some meta material something. And in that sense, it's totally useless.
Right, that's so that was an interesting response, but the question wasn't so much about simulation theory itself. It was asking, it was using simulation theory, or rather the way that the movie The Matrix brought simulation theory into the mainstream, as like an analogy to, and it was asking you whether you would consider writing a script for a similar movie, well, not a similar movie, but a movie that similarly um, sort of brings idealism into the mainstream. That was what they were asking.
I'm not sure I would be good at this. I mean, there is a book I wrote, More Than Allegory, and part three of that book is a story. It's a narrative, sort of highly stylized autobiographical story. And it reads as such, it reads like a novel. But I was able to do that because I didn't pull that stuff out of a hat, if you know what I mean. I'm not a very
Yeah.
creative person in that sense. I
Mm.
just highly stylized something that some stuff that did happen, some stuff that still does happen. Not quite in the way I put in there, of course. It's obviously fictionalized. Um, but I'm not sure I would be able to do what the questioner is asking. I certainly would be willing to collaborate with professional script writers. That I would certainly be willing to do.
All right. And then they ask, what is your favorite Jungian quote?
Oh, I wouldn't know where to begin.
That's a difficult one, right?
It's an endless list. I normally don't operate on the basis of quotes, slogans, so I wouldn't even know to mention an example right now. I will not answer this because if I give you one now, you would think, okay, this is the one that he thought of first, so this is his favorite, and there is no such a thing for me.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, I kind of share that view whenever someone asks me, even when someone asks me like my favorite book, it's hard to pick just one, you know? So I can definitely understand that. So we have a question from Abu Jordan. They ask, one of the reasons, well, they start with, one of the reasons I'm following your work is because of your willingness to interact with data that others ignore, such as trying to understand DMT and psychedelic trips. As I listen to you speak about ethics or a lack of an ethical system in nature, I wonder if you've thought about NDEs, or near death experiences, and specifically the life reviews that these people experience. Often they report feeling the emotions of people they hurt, even animals. This seems to suggest to me an ethic to treat others as we would like to be treated. What are your thoughts?
The last step that, okay, then we should treat others the way we like to be treated, that's something that we come up with. And by saying this, I'm not invalidating it. I think we are the means by which nature becomes self cognizing in an explicit and metacognitive sense. Without us, nature experiences, but it doesn't know that it experiences. So it cannot have any kind of valuation. It just happens, it just unfolds, and it unfolds the way it does because nature is what it is. There is no valuation passed, no moral judgment, no ethical judgment made, no choice, because be, beyond us, I don't think nature is metacognitive, and therefore it's fundamentally, well, not fundamentally, but it is operationally incapable of of deriving and applying valuations. We are the valuation machine of nature because we have become metacognitive little dissociated alters of nature, and we are capable of uh, uh, doing valuations, of applying values to what's happening and saying to ourselves, well, this is good and that's not good, or this should be done, or and that should not be done. So this is what I mean by valuation. When you make a choice like that between good and bad, between what should and should not, between what's productive and what's destructive, between what's harmonious and what's not harmonious, these are all valuations. And I don't think nature is capable of doing these valuations beyond us or without us. Um, so when I say that, the choice that the questioner alluded to about treating others the way we like to be treated, that's already a valuation. And we do that, not the rest of nature. And it's good that we do that. Maybe it is our responsibility to do that, which itself is already a valuation. But prior to the evaluation, all you have is experience, a life review, or that phenomenon that end the years report, that you feel what the other person felt during your interactions with them in life. Empathy, that feeling of shared experience. These are all experiences. In and of themselves, they do not entail, they may imply, but they do not entail evaluation. The fact that I felt all the crap you felt when I treated you badly is an experience, an empathic experience. And I think that happens in nature. Empathy is broad; it's the default state of nature prior to dissociation. But that does not in itself entail a ethical choice, a moral valuation. The ethical choice and the moral valuation is something you derive from the experience, from that moment of empathy. And as the part of nature that can pass these judgments, it may be our moral obligation to do so. But the end the year experience does not entail evaluation. The evaluation is something they do after the fact.
All right. So we had a question from Dog. He asks, don't we lose explanatory power when we believe in idealism? It seems like while on the surface we're giving up matter, space, and time, which makes our theory more parsimonious, whatever dispositional properties we posit to explain why we have the phenomena we do seems to just make our ontology complex again.
I disagree completely. Look, when we give up on matter as an ontological category, we are not giving up on the experiences that have motivated us to postulate matter. In other words, perception. Um, under idealism, even though you will not make the abstraction of attributing to matter an ontological category that is fundamentally distinct from mind, you don't do that under idealism, you are left with everything else. Everything we know about the thing we like to call matter. So let me put it in a different way. Strictly speaking, matter as defined under mainstream physicalism does not exist. But the thing we call matter, of course, exists. Maybe we shouldn't be calling it matter, But the thing we do call matter in our culture does exist, and it has dispositional properties. It behaves in a certain way, and we can study and model and predict that behavior through science. None of that is lost at all under idealism, at all. The fact that you've given up on an extra ontological category does not entail or imply that you have to give up on our models of nature, on our causal models, the causal chains that we know sort of nature tends to unfold according to these causal chains. None of that is given up. It's only a certain ontological attribution, a categorization that's given up because we can provide an ontological explanation for all those causal chains without requiring anything other than mind. All that we need is an extended form of mind that we need to have in order to give some metaphysical grounding for our scientific models. But I don't see that as leading to any loss whatsoever, not even an iota, not even a millimeter, nothing, absolutely nothing. Nothing is lost about our explanatory power. Uh, um, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And if the questioner thinks it does, then I would need to hear a more extensive elaboration about why the questioner thinks it does, because in my mind, it doesn't at all. Not an iota.
All right. So we'll move on to a question from Jacob Power. Um, he has he has two questions, but the follow-up will depend on what your answer to the first one is. So the first is, do you believe in direct perception or are you a representationalist? In other words, do you think that we perceive things in reality directly, or do you believe that all we perceive are just representations of things?
But I think by definition, what we perceive are representations of things, because what we perceive is not something that has standalone existence. It's an interaction between us and that which is perceived. So it depends on us too. Evolution has equipped us with certain sensory organs and not with others. So I think it's pretty clear and undeniable that our perceptions are representational in nature. They are necessarily so. Otherwise, there would be no distinction in nature. We would all perceive the same things across species, for instance. And we know that that's not the case. Some species can't hear, other species can see ultraviolet. Maybe from a first person perspective, even the things they perceive that we think are equivalent to what we perceive, like the same frequency spectrum we perceive, maybe qualitatively for them it feels totally different than it feels to us. So, yeah, to answer the question, I'm certainly very I'm very strongly for representationalism. I think our perceptions are representational in nature, they necessarily so. There is no way they can be other than that.
All right. So the follow-up question is, how do you then deal with representationalism's array of skeptical epistemic problems, since representationalism cuts us off from the external world, leading to external world skepticism, skepticism of other minds, skepticism about the validity of the senses, solipsism, etc.
That's that question could be answered for days by just reviewing literature. Um, the fact that our access to the external world is representational and therefore not direct and not absolute does not mean that there is no such a thing as the external world. And we know that because we can talk to each other and report to each other what we are perceiving. And we will know that our perceptions are sort of consistent with one another. So there seems to be a world out there which we both inhabit. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make sense of the fact that we seem to describe the same world. How could it be so if we didn't share the same world? Now, what that common world is in and of itself, behind or beyond representation, is something we do not have access to. But we do have access to representation, and representation is not nothing. Representation means something. It allows us to make some very reasonable inferences, including the inference that there is a world out there, all right? as it is in itself, it may have very little to do with our representations, but it surely corresponds to our representations in some self consistent manner. Otherwise, two different people would not report living in a consistent shared world. So we can make statements about what the world is out there. We can even make statements about other minds. Now, I grant that if you really want to be an absolute skeptic, then you have to be a solipsist. But I personally don't think that that's the best explanation for the facts of reality. I'll give you an example. Uh, I know that from within, I feel in certain ways that correlate with certain external behavioral manifestations. For instance, if I'm sad, I cry, and tears flow down my eyes. If I am in love, I behave in a certain foolish way. And then I see that same behavior in other people who seem to be entirely analogous to me in the sense that their representations in my mind are pretty much alike my own representation in my mind when I look in the mirror. Uh, so, on the basis of that, I think it's very reasonable to say that those people also feel sadness when I see them crying. They also feel love when I see them behaving in a foolish way. And I think that's the simplest explanation for the facts. Now, a solipsist could say, well, you're just projecting yourself onto others, and therefore you're creating those other representations, those other images according to yourself, and that's why they behave in an analogous way to yourself. It's because you are projecting yourself onto them. You're still making them up. Solipsism is still true. Well, the argument against this would be that when you're younger and when you still don't have certain experiences, um, it's difficult to argue that you could have projected experiences that you didn't have yet. For instance, when I was 10 years old and I had a cousin who was a little older, um, and she behaved in completely foolish ways from my perspective once she got a boyfriend. And I was curious about that, like why someone who was normal until last week now behaves in a completely foolish, obsessive way. So I didn't understand that because I didn't have that in myself. So I couldn't have made that up. And then you might say, well, that was not true then. Yeah, but later in life, I fell in love myself. And then I acquired insight into what the inner perspective of that outer behavior is. And it all makes sense. So I think that is enough reason for any reasonable person to say, you know what, other people have minds of their own because they manifest external behaviors akin to my own when I have intense inner life, even prior to my having that inner life myself. So I couldn't have made this stuff up. And it's also reasonable to say there is an external world we all inhabit. We have no clue what it is in and of itself because all we have are representations, but the commonalities, patterns, and regularities of our representations are enough for us to make some very, very reasonable statements about what this world is, even though we don't have direct access to it.
All right. So, um, Leo Akala had some questions they wanted to ask in voice chat. I'm not sure if they're here right now because I pinged them in text, but I want to check real quick. Leo, are you there? Are you able to
Yeah,
unmute yourself? Oh, okay. If you want to ask like one or two of your questions, they're kind of long, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to all three, but it depends on how much time it takes to get
sure.
through them. But if you want to start with any one that you want, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm going to start with the first one. It's my understanding that in analytical idealism, postulate a mind at large with no intentionality, um, and but in that you have found a deep sense of meaning in this metaphysics. And I'm just paraphrasing some of your words in the interview you had with Kurt J. Mangle that we love that long conversation you two had. Uh, and a lot of people build meaning with narratives that imply an intended order, a designed plan, a predefined storyline that comes from quote unquote higher levels of consciousness or from a God with a plan. So could you please expand on how you get meaning out of a metaphysics that implies absolute non-intentionality and that explains what appears in each person's awareness as just the results of evolutionary dynamics?
Yeah. Um, I'll start with just a quick observation. When you say intentionality to an analytic philosopher, you will be interpreted in a way different than what you intended to be interpreted. For an analytic philosopher, intentionality has a technical sense, a technical meaning, which is not the colloquial meaning of there being an intentional plan. But anyway, I know what you mean by your question. I think if life were a sort of school in which we are supposed to learn things that the teacher already knows, or that something in the universe, like mind at large, already knows. It has all the answers already. And nonetheless, it's putting us through this harsh school that entails a whole lot of suffering, actually unfathomable suffering. You know, if you try to wrap your head around how much suffering there has been in the 3.5 billion years of life on this planet, your head will explode in no time at all. So, to me, that sounds beyond cruel that we would be forced to go through this school while the answers are already there. They are already somewhere there in the universe. They are already in the possession of the teacher that's putting us through this shit. Um, I think that, um, I don't think that's true. Not because I would hate it. I absolutely would hate it. I think I would check out from life tomorrow if I think that's what is going on. I would save myself all this crap because going through this is for nothing. Because if I die and I'm rejoining mind at large, and then the answers will be there. So all this shit is for nothing. So I hate it, but that's not the reason I don't think it is the case. I don't think it is the case because the behavior of nature outside higher animals like us, dolphins, elephants, gorillas, the behavior of nature is very regular, very predictable. The laws of nature don't seem to be changing every day since we started taking measurements. There may be some fluctuations on certain universal constants, on certain parameters, but the patterns and regularities themselves are by and large pretty much stable. Um, Even the behavior of lower animals is very stable. Now, why is that behavior so stable and predictable? Well, because they are instinctive. They didn't yet have the thought, oh, I am a subject and there is a world out there. So let me make some choices now. No, they don't have this thought. They are not metacognitive, they are instinctive. And instinct always has one immediate answer to every question. It does not require deliberation. It does not require thinking through things. Thinking through things is a metacognitive phenomenon. Instinct gives you an immediate answer that is always the same if the circumstances are the same. If you ask one question repeatedly under the same circumstances, instinct will always give you the same answer. And the fact that the laws of nature seem to be so stable, to me, is highly indicative of instinctive mental processes. Mind at large seems to me instinctive because that's what we sort of that's what we can infer by observing the behavior of nature. Um, so that's the reason I don't think it's true. But if it were true, in addition to this, I think it would be meaningless. It would give us it would put us in a position in which it would be impossible to conjure up any meaning, because what meaning can there be in going through a school of suffering just to arrive at the same answers that the bloody teacher already had? I don't see meaning in this at all. But I do see meaning in a research lab as opposed to a school. In a research lab, you're going through shit because you need to get to an answer that nobody has. You don't have a teacher. You are the researcher. You are doing the experimentation, and you hurt yourself in that process. Anybody who did science knows that that happens rather often. You get hurt in the process of doing research, especially if you want to do it quickly. Um, and that, to me, is extraordinarily meaningful. It provides meaning, justification for every bit of suffering that has gone on in the last 3.5 billion years. Jung himself said, uh, if there is meaning, we can take on anything, anything. Um, So to me, it is precisely the fact that there isn't a, well, the fact, it's the hypothesis that there isn't a premeditated plan, or there isn't a higher entity with all the answers already, putting us through this shit for nothing, just as some kind of cruel spectacle, cruel torture. Um, it's precisely that that is meaningful. The answers are not there. They are not there yet. The answers come through us because we are suffering. Because if you're not suffering, you don't ask the big questions. And if you are having a great life of joy and Epicureanism, you will surf down through life without asking a deep question until the moment you die. It's only when life hits you in the face with a 2x4 that you stop and go, oh, shit. And then you ask the questions, what is this about? What is going on here? What is this for? So suffering is an indispensable tool of learning, and because of it, if we are the ones that are getting to answers that nobody has, then our suffering is now justified and meaningful. So not only do I find meaning in there not being a premeditated plan, I think meaning would be impossible if there were a premeditated plan.
Beautiful. Thank you. Second question is the following. As a generalized observation, it seems that on a person's life, there are themes or patterns of experiences that recur regardless what they do or do not do to try to fix them or to move beyond those experiences. Examples, for some people, it could be something around love and relationship, or for others, it could be challenges with finances, others might be health issues throughout their lives, and so on. In a similar fashion, in some cases more evident than others, the personal themes can not only be defined by challenges, but also by inclinations or passions or talents. It's tempting to build, again, and this is kind of a follow-up question to the prior one, it's tempting to build stories to explain these phenomena, pointing to these themes as being part of a life design or choices made at a higher level of consciousness and so on. These explanations imply an intentionality on behalf of mind at large or mind beyond the personal, a sort of storyline being written and so on. Having some uh, idea as to what to explore through the unique vantage point of a quote unquote personal perspective. So, can you please expand on how, from your metaphysics, these recurring patterns, these themes, can be explained without the need for intentionality from a higher consciousness?
Sure. When you talk about these patterns, I mean, I'll describe them as a direction, right? Let's talk about a sort of a preferential direction. Your life tends to flow in a certain direction and not in another, and that direction varies from person to person. I completely acknowledge that. I think that's absolutely true. My own life experience points to this. Life pushes you in certain directions and not others. And these directions are not the same for everybody. They tend to be peculiar, idiosyncratic. Now, how do you explain a direction? There are two ways you can explain it. One is something is pulling you from the front. That's that's the idea of a plan. So there is a higher knowledge with awareness of the desired endpoint that's pulling you from the front because it has this knowledge of what the destination should be. But that's not the only way to explain a direction. A direction can be determined by a push from behind. And a push from behind has to do with lack. What parts of your conscious inner life um, have gaps in them? A gap in insight, a gap in self acceptance, a gap in empathy, a gap in understanding, a gap in tolerance. There are so many mental gaps we can have. And when we have those gaps, we don't see certain things that we otherwise would see, and we stumble on them and we get hurt. And because we then still don't see them, we go and stumble on them again. And we keep on stumbling on them until that push from behind finds another direction. And then we follow that direction. And there is a clear way in which you can make choices in life that go with the flow and choices that go against the flow. And I think these are all amenable to be explained by a push from behind. I mean, I'm not going speak about particular people in my life, but I come from the corporate world, and there are people in the corporate world that are entirely driven by a story of power, influence, and achievement. And that's the narrative they tell themselves about the meaning of their lives. But that's a narrative that comes from these people's what we call the adaptive self, not the natural self. When we are kids, we are natural selves. But as we grow and we get educated by teachers and educated by society, and society gives us a recipe about what's good and where we should go and what we should be, then we get these ideas about the ego, status, power, fame, and all that. And we follow that recipe even when that recipe is no longer adaptive. Then that recipe has a role to play. You need to carve a space for yourself in life, a house to live, enough money to feed yourself and to have a minimum degree of comfort. So these narratives, these adaptive narratives, have a role to play, but we tend to stick to them after they are no longer adaptive. After we have arrived somewhere, we keep playing on that narrative, and we keep trying to do that thing repeatedly again and again and again. A promotion is never enough. You have to be promoted again to the next thing, to the next car, to the next house, to the next million. We get stuck in that adaptive self. And what happens is that the push from behind that your natural self gives will make you stumble into all kinds of things that hurt. And but that's not a pull from the front of somebody who knows where you need to go and is pulling you in that direction. No, it's a push from behind because of your lacks, because of the gaps you have. The gaps you have in your visual field will make you stumble on rocks and walls that you don't see, and they will hurt. So I recognize this direction that you allude to. I recognize them even from a transpersonal level. I don't think our lives are determined purely by our own personal stories. I think we are just, parts, cogs in the machinery of nature. Maybe machinery is a bad metaphor, but in the great system, the great organism of nature. And nature is trying to go somewhere partly through us. And we have the choice to resist our role in that larger system or accept our role in that larger system. Either way, we are going to be pushed from behind. Anyway, it will be a matter of whether you resist that push or not. So I recognize the directions, I recognize the telos, I recognize that we want to go somewhere, but I think it can be done with a push from behind. To give you another metaphor from optimization theory, many optimization problems are solved without an awareness of what the answer is. That's why we have these problems. That's why we use computers to solve these problems. We don't know the answer. So we can't pull the system from the front. We have to push from behind. But pushing from behind works just fine. And the way for you to understand that is think of the game of finding something without seeing, and somebody's telling you you're getting warmer or you're getting colder. So you don't know where you need to go, but you know if you're getting warmer or if you're getting colder. And what who provides that feedback to you? Well, the way you feel. If you're going in a certain direction in your life and you're feeling increasingly unhappy, uncomfortable, and depressed, well, you're getting colder. But if you change direction, and you feel better, you feel more yourself, you're okay, wake up in the morning and go work, have your day, well, you're getting warmer. So nature gives you this feedback. You are getting warmer or you're getting colder. And that's the push from behind. That feedback can be given on the basis of knowledge of what is now, not necessarily on knowledge of what should be. There doesn't need to be premeditation. All you need to do is pay attention to what is going on right now. And then you know whether you're getting colder and whether you're getting warmer, and you will follow the natural direction of your life without the need for any superior knowledge of the end goal or the end destination or the end point. The goal will know because it's getting warmer or it's getting colder, but the destination may be unknown, completely unknown in the whole of the universe. And yet we will follow that telos because we are pushed from behind.
All right. Um, Thank you, Leo Kala, for your questions. We have to move on now, but like I said in text chat, if we can get back to your last question towards the end, then we can do that once we get to everyone else, maybe. So for now, we'll move on to Lucas, who has a lot of questions, but I'll just I'll go through and pick out a few. So what is in store for the foundation you're part of, the Essentia Foundation?
Oh, we have loads of ambitions. We want to start a book imprint to publish books. We will continue to do our yearly conferences on, the role of mind in nature. Um, we will be having a podcast, maybe more than one podcast. We will be producing films, documentaries, short ones, long ones. There's a lot in the works. We have tremendous ambitions about where we want to go. And we have this vision that in 20 or 30 years, idealism will be mainstream. And we want to do our part to get to that.
Okay. Um, can you comment on Neoplatonism and what you make of it in relation to your own metaphysics?
I don't know enough of it to comment intelligently. I know a bit of it, enough to know that I have some sympathies there, but I don't want to speak of something that I don't know enough to have a coherent and strong position on. So I will skip that. Regrettably, I apologize, but I just don't know enough to comment intelligently on it.
Okay, that's fine. Um, has metaphysical idealism enriched your life in any way? If so, in what ways? And has it harmed your relationships with more physicalist-minded people?
No, I have friends that are physicalists. So no, I take exception. Look, I'm more of a nice guy than I come across in the media because I take exception with um, militant physicalists who try to make this association between physicalism and intelligence and whatever is not physicalism with stupidity. I take exception with that. I think that's a very dangerous cultural artifact, and I react to it by playing the same game, sort of putting a mirror in front of them. So I will call them stupid, and I will tell why they're stupid. And not because I am like that myself in my normal life. I'm not going to say that to my physicalist friend. To finally come back to your question. I'm not going to tell my physicalist friends, you guys are stupid. No, I don't have the need to say that. They are where they are in their lives. They will have an insight when they have that insight, or they will not. Their journey is different from mine. Their path is different from mine. Maybe they need the physicalist narrative, given the place where they are in their lives right now. So why do I call these other guys stupid? Even if it's not in me to do that. Well, because when you communicate, when you become sort of a public intellectual and you put a message out there, you're playing a kind of game, an important game, a game that can change people's lives. How many people are now in deep depression because they buy into this fairy tale of materialism and therefore they see no meaning in life? How many people are going through this shit because of this narrative? So this game is important. We have skin in this game. So I do play it, but I'm very aware it is a game. So I play it tactically or strategically. I take the deliberate decision to put a mirror in front of militant physicalists and tell them, look, you're stupid because of, and then the list comes. That's not my normal personality, but it's the only way to break this association between whatever is not physicalism and stupidity. The only way to break this association is to do exactly what was done in order to create the association in the first place, but the other way around. They created the association by saying, oh, you're stupid if you're not physicalist. And now I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying, okay, you're stupid because you're a physicalist. And I explain why. I don't leave it there. I don't just say you're stupid. I explain why and I write why. And I've been writing the why for over 10 years now in a number of different ways, in many different words. But it is a game. So, no, despite the game that I play deliberately, in my personal life, I'm not pissed off with my physicalist friends. No, not at all.
All right, and then I'll ask two more questions from this person. Um, we haven't had a lot of AI questions. A lot of them have been philosophy of mind questions so far. So I'll ask this one: if silicon-based artificial intelligence cannot be conscious under your metaphysics, what is the upper limit of what AI can achieve?
I don't think silicon based artificial intelligence can be conscious in and of itself in the way you and I are conscious in and of ourselves. But I do think what underlies AI, which is the same thing that underlies the entire inanimate universe as a whole, is consciousness. Now, the upper limit of I don't know. I'm not sure there is any. Um, when I worked on AI in the 90s, um, we sort of hit a wall and we thought that we were not being creative enough to devise efficient enough learning algorithms to get us to what technically is called global minima instead of getting stuck in local minima. In other words, to finding the best solutions to the problems posed as opposed to getting stuck in a suboptimal solution. We had difficulties finding the global optimum, finding the real solutions. And we thought we didn't have the creativity necessary to come up with the correct learning algorithms. But guess what? 20 years later, a few years ago, the algorithms are still largely the same we had in the 90s. We are still doing neural networks driven by back propagation, all this stuff. Now it became a little bit more complex. Now we have more feedback mechanisms. Now we can do automatic feature extraction, which we didn't have the processing power to do in the past. So there is some complexity increase, but that increase in the complexity of the algorithms is not really a fundamental increase. It's just because now we have the brute force to run the stuff that we had already thought out in the 90s. Now we have the processing power, the brute force to run that stuff. Uh, um, at levels we couldn't dream of before. And guess what? Suddenly, all kinds of problems we thought were impossible in the 90s, now they're being trivially solved. And they are being trivially solved not because the human intellect has made a huge progress forward. I can tell you, we haven't. The basics of this stuff, it's all the same we had in the 90s. Multi-layer neural networks, all that stuff. We had that stuff algorithmically back then. The difference is now brute force. Um, and that opens a door for progress that is not capped by human cognition. In other words, perhaps we do not need to evolve as a species to bring artificial intelligence to levels that today are undreamed of, because brute force seems to be very, very effective at solving these problems. These problems are solved in a way that even the people who develop the learning algorithms, they don't know how the algorithm came to the solution. And that's the strong thing about AI. You do not need to understand how the solutions work or why they work. You don't. You only need to understand how their learning process works so you can implement it, so you can arrive at solutions that you yourself cannot even dream of. And brute force is helping a lot. Now, the only limit I think that we could face is that this increase in the brute force of our processing power over the last 30 years has happened because of the so-called Moore's law, which basically means that we can cram more and more and more tinier and tinier and tinier transistors in the same space of silicon when we make a semiconductor chip, a processor, for instance. Every year, we can cram more smaller transistors, which allow for increasing processing power, which is the brute force I'm talking about. However, atoms are not getting any smaller. So at some point, when a silicon gate is constituted by 4 atoms, yeah, how much more can you squeeze more gates inside, a square centimeter of silicon? How much smaller can you make those gates? There are critical parameters in the manufacturing of semiconductors. One of them is what we call critical dimension uniformity, or width uniformity of a certain line. When that uniformity parameters start being measured in terms of the number of atoms that you deviate from the ideal, like if you have, one silicon atom more in that line, uh, then it's all gone. Yeah, the moment you get to that level, then you hit a wall because atoms are not getting any smaller. And then could we then find another way to continue to scale our brute force processing power? Probably, probably ways that we can't even devise with clarity today. Three-dimensional silicon is probably not one of those ways, and that's because of the economic, the nature of the manufacturing process. It scales on a plane. It doesn't scale in 3D as well as it does on a plane. I could get into the details of that, but it doesn't matter. Um, but that wall, constituted by atoms not getting smaller, I think that's the only reason we have today to think that there could be a limit to how far artificial intelligence can grow, um, because it would limit the very brute force uh, thing that is enabling artificial intelligence to progress so fast and so far beyond our human ability to understand what's going on. So if that brute force growth hits a wall, then the whole thing hits a wall. And we may be dealing with that in the 2030s. Towards the second half of the 2030s, we may be hitting walls there along the paths we are pursuing today, fundamental walls. But even then, human ingenuity can be applicable to find other directions through which to increase that brute force. And then it could go on and on and on. So I don't know, sky's the limit.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, Lucas. We will now move on. Be Here Now asks, who would you most like to debate?
Huh. Phew. Uh, the answer would be totally different than the answer to the question who I would most like to talk to. Because the people I would really like to talk to are not the people I would like to debate. I would like to debate someone to prove the person wrong and have an impact in the culture.
Hmm.
um, and I would go as far as to, I would enjoy humiliating a few people, not because I have this evil trend in me, but because of the cultural value it would have. That some, arrogant physicalists would find themselves in the position of being humiliated by a non-physicalist. I think there would be significant value in that. Not to me personally, for my ego. I don't have that anymore. I have, I still have many weaknesses and problems, but not that one. That one I've outgrown. But I think it would have a positive cultural impact. So I think I would like to debate Daniel Dennett. Um, who else would be an influential person from the other side to debate? I mean, whoever is the most influential, bad-mouthed, militant physicalist out there, that is the person I would like most to debate.
All right, fair enough. Um, we might have some people in this community that fit that description, to be honest with you, but I don't know. All right. So the next question, Dr. Markus Muller's no container ontology doesn't seem to require mind at large. Is that correct? And if so, is it therefore more parsimonious than your idealism?
It only doesn't require mind at large insofar as it is not an ontology. And that's the thing you have to keep in mind. Marcus is trying to not touch ontology. He's trying to stay as close to science as possible, as close to a predictive model as possible, although he is aware that fundamentally what he's putting forward is more than just a predictive model. But at the same time, yeah, he avoids whatever ontological statement he can avoid without hurting the completeness of the idea he's putting forward. So I will honor Marcus and say he does not need mind at large, but only insofar as he is avoiding an ontology altogether, a real ontology in which he has to explicitly say what is out there, if anything at all. Now, if he has to go for an ontology, and that's a discussion I've had with him already more than once, if he has to go for an ontology, my view, not necessarily his, my view is that he cannot avoid some kind of universal framework within which different observers exist, because he makes an effort to say that within the world that is created by an observer A, an observer B can appear, and the world created by observer B would be consistent with the world within which observer B appears towards observer A. I don't know if you could follow this. I cannot do justice to him unless I am accurate and precise in what I said. That's why I said this in such a long format, complicated format. Um, but because he makes an effort to establish that the world of observer B would be consistent within the world of observer A, within which observer B can appear, because of that, he is implicitly um, postulating, I think, a common ontological ground of some form. I think if he were listening to this, he would say, no, I don't need to go that far. And probably he would be right. But the question was, um, does he need to postulate a common ontology? Well, if you're talking about ontology, I would say yes, it's an implication of his views that you need some form of world in which observers A and B exist. Um, Otherwise, it's solipsism.
Okay. So we have another question from Jacob Power. He asks, I assume you believe mind at large slash universal consciousness exists necessarily. If something exists necessarily, then it would seem to follow that its extrinsic appearance would exist necessarily. So it seems, under your view, it may be the case that the universe exists necessarily, since the universe is the extrinsic appearance of mind at large, unless mind at large could somehow choose how it extrinsically appears. What do you think of this, Dr. Kastrup?
I think if
Are
there is
you
no
are you a necessitarian?
I think if there is no dissociation, then by definition there is no extrinsic appearance. There is only the intrinsic view, the first person perspective of mind at large. What generates the possibility for an outside appearance is the boundary of dissociation. Without that boundary, there is no inside or outside. There is only the inside in a sense. There is only the thing in itself. There is no representation. There is no phenomena. There is no appearance. Because appearance is that point of view from the outside. And for there to be an outside, there has to be a boundary that separates the inside from the outside. And that boundary is dissociation. So, insofar as dissociation is a necessity, then I would say an extrinsic appearance is a necessity because it follows necessarily from the formation of a dissociative boundary. And then what that appearance will look like, I don't think that's a choice either. What it will look like will be a function of what it is. What the thing in itself is determines what its appearance is when observed from across a dissociative boundary. And the thing in itself can't really change what it is. Um, it does what it does because it is what it is, at least insofar as it's not metacognitive and purely instinctive. Now, you can ask, is dissociation a necessity? I think it is, and my reasoning for to think that is that it has happened. That it has happened shows that dissociation happens when you have a universe that is what our universe is. um, because the universe is what it is, dissociation happens. And since the universe can't be what it is not, it is necessarily what it is, then dissociation necessarily had to happen, since it is a instinctive manifestation of the universe, a behavior of the universe that is given by what the universe is. So, in that sense, I think the whole thing is a necessity. And then you might say, well, you're a determinist, you're against free will. And then we get into that, that red herring of free will. Uh, um, I think at the level of universal consciousness, the necessity is the will. um, we make a difference, a distinction between necessity and will, because we make a distinction between what's inside and the pressures from the outside. So, for instance, if I don't want to work tomorrow, I still have to go to work tomorrow because the society outside within which I am inserted, the society out there, forces me to work in order to continue to exist. So I work not because I want, but because there is a necessity imposed on me to work. Okay, that's fine for me as as an alter, a dissociated aspect of the universe. But when it comes to the universe itself, there is no outside. For universal consciousness, there is no necessity coming from the outside. So the will is the necessity in the Schopenhauerian sense that I can act as I will, but I cannot will what I will. What I will is a function of what I am. Therefore, it's a necessity. But it's also not deterministic in the sense that everything that is happening because I will it. You see the point? So, from the perspective of universal consciousness, everything is necessity and everything is free willed because there is no distinction between the two. If there is no outside, then the will is the necessity and the necessity is the willed. These two concepts collapse into one and the same thing. So that's why I think free will exists and it's entirely necessitated.
All right. So next question comes from Canadian Catholic. He asks, is there any way to rescue functionalism in philosophy of mind?
No, no, come on. This was a stillborn child. No.
I I figured you might say something like that. Okay, so we can move on. Eli Swan has some questions. Um, so their first question is: it is my understanding that you believe mind at large acts only by instinct rather than intelligently. Could you explain the reasons why you believe that?
So let's just define some terms first. Mind at large is what is left of universal consciousness after you account for all alters. In other words, for all living beings. So if you remove the mentation of all living beings from universal consciousness, what is left is mind at large, and the extrinsic appearance of mind at large is the inanimate universe, the non living, non metabolizing universe. Now, mind at large plus all alters together are universal consciousness. So that's the term. Now, can you repeat the question? I forgot the question.
The question was, could you explain the reasons why you believe that mind at large acts only by instinct rather than
Oh yeah,
intelligently?
oh yeah. Okay. So the reason I think that is that the laws of nature, I think we talked about this earlier, the laws of nature are so stable and predictable. As far as we can go back in time, and our models of the universe today are applicable to what the universe was back in time. Now, admittedly, there is some circularity in this reasoning if you go enough back in time, but at least every evidence we have collected so far, which may not be complete, it may be far from complete, but every piece of evidence we have collected so far points to the behavior of the universe being very stable and predictable. We may not be able to predict it because it's too complicated, but when we can predict it, those predictions are applicable continuously everywhere at any point in time, at any point in space, insofar as we have been able to collect evidence. To me, this is the hallmark of instinctive behavior. Instinct provides that automatic, immediate answer that is always the same if you ask the same question under the same circumstances. A crocodile would jump on you if you approach them to less, I don't know, 3 meters. I forgot what the number is, but no, there is a precise distance in which you can expect they will launch an attack on you. So animals that are instinctive have predictable behavior, and the inanimate universe behaves, as far as we can see, in a highly predictable way. If the universe were metaconscious, metacognitive, if the universe could say to itself, oh, this is happening now, I am doing this. Do I like this? Do I want it to be differently? I think the universe would change its ways. When, you know, 6 million Jews are killed on this planet less than 100 years ago, it's difficult to imagine that a reflective universe wouldn't have taken explicit notice of what was going on there and say, no, 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 let's change the laws of nature here and stop this from happening.
Okay. Um, the next question is, I understand that we are dissociated alters under your view, but how can we understand the case of people that experience dissociative identity disorder? Are they dissociated alters themselves? Is this like a nested dissociation?
Yeah, that's exactly, you nailed it. That's what it is. Yes.
Okay, simple answer. Nice. They also asked, during meditation, I've experienced states which feel more real than the reality I'm used to experiencing. This has caused great doubt in me because now I don't know how I could possibly distinguish what is real from what is not. Do you have any thoughts regarding this?
Yeah, you nailed it too. A lot of people who do psychedelics, they have this amazing trips, um, which come accompanied by this sense of ultra reality, of something being more real than real. And the way they go about this is they return from these experiences in which they've met aliens from the Pleiades and whatnot, and higher dimensions, and you know, unspeakable things happen. And they come back and they say, well, because I had this sense of ultra reality, then those things actually happen. Maybe I was in the Pleiades, maybe I was in a higher physical dimension, and that stuff really literally happened. Now, I think this is the wrong way to go about it. The stuff that happened was entirely mental. It wasn't physical. They didn't really go to the Pleiades. Those unspeakable things didn't literally happen. So, what do you have to make then out of this sense of ultra reality? Well, what it tells you is that mental phenomena can be extraordinarily real. That what is real is the mental. So their trip to the Pleiades was mental. But these two right here, me talking to you guys, is mental too. And we know that because the trip to the Pleiades felt more real than this. And if that was mental, and it certainly was, right? I think we can argue very compellingly that somebody who is lying on a bed with their eyes closed, and went to the Pleiades while their partner was next to them, seeing that their body didn't go anywhere, I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that they weren't literally in the Pleiades and the experience was mental. But we should take the feeling of ultra reality very seriously because it tells something about our feeling of reality right now. If a mental event can conjure up a feeling of ultra reality, then a mental event can conjure up a feeling of mere reality, like it is right now. So that should let us to question the nature of what's happening right now, not to question the mental nature of what you experience during meditation or during a psychedelic trance. Those are mental, all right? But this is mental too. I think that is the great insight we have to take from the experience of ultra reality. It is mental, but so is this.
All right, and then they have a question from their father, who is a firm believer in materialism. He asks, if matter doesn't exist as something physical, does this mean scientists have made a mistake when they describe the elemental particles?
No, absolutely not. Science is ontology or metaphysics agnostic. Look, what science does is to model and predict nature's behavior. It has very little, if anything, it has very little. It has something, but very little to say about what nature is and of itself. And what it does have to say about what nature is an implication of our knowledge of nature's behavior. If nature behaves in a certain way that sort of contradicts a hypothesis about what nature is, then we can say that nature is not that on the basis of nature's behavior. But in essence, science only studies behavior. And our models for that behavior make use of what you could call convenient fictions. These are very handy theoretical entities we create. And then we say, if nature, no, no, and then we can say the following: nature behaves as though these theoretical entities actually existed. But whether the theoretical entities actually exist or not is irrelevant for science. So long as your predictions are accurate and confirmed by experiments, you stick to your theoretical entities, to your theoretical abstractions, because they give you a certain mathematical way of thinking about what's going on that puts you in a position of being able to predict its behavior. But those theoretical entities do not need to be actually what nature is. It's completely irrelevant for science. What matters is that the predictions are confirmed by experiment. So, for instance, um, until not very long ago, or say until the late 19th century, um, or during the late 19th century, the time of Rutherford, um, we thought that there were these little particles, these little things that when they came together, they would constitute substances and objects. These little subatomic particles, we imagined them as tiny little things that occupy an infinitesimally small but do occupy space. And they have some kind of solidity. Um, and guess what? Insofar as we could ascertain with the technology of the time, nature behaved neatly as though these little bodies actually existed. And that was enough to make the predictions of the time. Perfectly okay. Now, in the meantime, we know that such things do not exist at all because now we have the technology to study and to observe nature's behavior with a level of precision and detail and magnification that shows that nature's behavior is not consistent with there being these little things, these little particles bouncing around. That those little particles are the wrong way to think about nature's behavior. The right way to think about nature's behavior, which is now confirmed by the most precise measurements we are able to make with today's technology, is that there are no little things at all. There are only fields. And what we used to think of as things are just patterns of excitations of the field, ripples in the water, so to say. There's only the water, there is only the field. What we used to call an elementary subatomic particle is just a ripple moving through the water. And it has a certain speed, it has a certain size, it has a certain height, just like ripples do. You can measure a ripple. You can say it's going this direction and with that speed, it's that thick, it's that high, but still, there is nothing to the ripple but the water. In the same way, there is nothing to the so called elementary subatomic particles but the underlying field. So now we think in terms of fields. Does that mean that these fields actually exist? No, it is irrelevant. These fields are theoretical entities that allow us to carry out the mathematics. Um, Before Einstein, we thought of space time as a sort of how to say, a coordinate system, as a sort of a box within which you put things and within which things moved. Now, since Einstein, we know that space-time is not an empty box. It's a thing that can be stretched and twisted. And sure enough, in 100 years from now, we will be thinking about space-time in a yet completely different way. And we will be thinking about quantum fields in a completely different way. Actually, we will abandon quantum fields. We will abandon space-time in the Einsteinian interpretation. And we will come up with new theoretical abstractions, new theoretical entities, such that the behavior of nature that we'll be able to see then will be so that nature will behave as though our new theoretical abstractions were true. So these are all theoretical tools, theoretical entities that allow us to make predictions. They have very little to say about what the nature really is. And what they do have to say is through exclusion. What we know today of the behavior of nature at the smallest scales is not consistent with the little particle view of materiality. We know matter is not made of little particles. So our understanding of nature's behavior at that scale has excluded one hypothesis about what nature is. It is not tiny little marbles bouncing around. That we know. But we cannot settle the question of being, what nature is, only by studying its behavior. At least so far, it has been impossible. And for science, it does not matter, again, because science is not busy with what is. Science is busy with how it behaves, whatever it is. And that's all we need to develop technology. Technology is an exploitation of our knowledge of how nature behaves. Because we know how nature behaves, we can put that behavior to work for our benefit. So, this symbiotic relationship between science and technology is entirely based on our ability to make predictions about nature's behavior using these little abstract theoretical entities about which it's entirely irrelevant whether they really exist or not.
Okay. So Canadian Catholic wanted to ask another question in BC, so I'm gonna unmute him. Canadian Catholic, you there?
Yeah. Um, Hi, Dr. Kestrup. Thank you so much once again for doing this. I actually probably have several questions, but for the sake of time, I'll just settle on one. Dr. Kestrup, do you think that the challenges that are put forward to the um, Cartesian dualistic understanding of mind can be overcome, and the view can successfully be defended in the 21st century, even if that requires a slight reformulation? Thank you.
So your question is whether my view can be defended in the 21st century?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm not sure I understood your question. Are you asking whether my views can be defended in the 21st century?
Um, well, the current research shows that Cartesian dualism is in an extreme minority in the philosophy of mind. So I thought you could elaborate why you believe that is and what is a way to sway philosophers. Maybe I put it poorly.
I think there is a large degree of consensus in analytic philosophy today that dualism is not the way to go. It poses more problems than degrees of freedom it opens for a potential new solution. Um, so I think monistic alternatives are the ones that are more seriously considered. And idealism is a monistic alternative. And an idealist says that all there is mind, not your mind alone, not my mind alone, not my cat's mind alone, but also a extended transpersonal mind, which is ontologically speaking, mind nonetheless. In other words, it is of the same nature as our minds, but it isn't our minds alone. It is of the same ontological nature as our minds. And that completely avoids the substance dualism that is so problematic because now there is only one, quote, substance, only one type of existent. And that type is a mentality, not your own, not your mentality alone or my mentality, but extended mentation in mind at large. That's a monistic view. And by being so, it avoids all the difficult problems that are incurred by substance dualism, like the interaction problem, the parsimony problem. There are many problems unsolved and perhaps insoluble problems around dualism. There is a certain arbitrary flavor to substance dualism that most philosophers are not sympathetic to, and I think for good reason. I'm not a dualist either. Um, Nonetheless, although physicalism or materialism is also monistic, it's not dualistic. It leads to a kind of a dualistic way of thinking, because physicalists also talk about mind and matter. In a sense, even idealists often surrender to the need to speak colloquially and to be understood. And they sacrifice precision and accuracy, and they also incur in some, dualistic metaphors, and that has to do with our cultural inheritance. Descartes' statement was incredibly powerful. It solved a huge problem for the intellectual establishment of the time. Namely, it carved out space for scientists to do science without being burned at the stake. And it appeased the church because no, the church still had the mind or the soul or the psyche. And the Greek word psyche is translated as both mind and soul. So soul means mind. And Descartes basically left mind for the church, and the church was happy because for the church, if you have the soul, if you have the mind, that's all there is, right? There is nothing else. Let these scientists play with their little abstractions. But for the scientists, it meant survival. They could do their thing without running the risk, or running less of a risk, of being burned at the stake. And that is reverberating until today. It was such a powerful cultural move that it's reverberating to this day. We all think, or tend to think, in dualistic terms, in terms of mind and matter. And even I face a lot of difficulties because people, tell me, "Well, Bernardo, of course it's not only mind, because if I stick a needle in your arm, which is a material process, you will feel pain. Or if I open your skull, when I start injecting electrical impulses in your brain, your experience will change. So idealism cannot be right." Yeah, they fail to see that for me, for any idealist, the needle is the image of a mental process. The scalpel that opens my skull, and the saw that opens my skull, is also the image of a mental process. And a neurosurgeon injecting electrical impulses into my brain with a probe, that too is the image, or the extrinsic appearance, of a mental process. And that such a mental process changes my own conscious inner life is trivial. One mental process affects another, influences another. We know that it happens every day. Our thoughts change our emotions. Our emotions change our thoughts. Mental processes interact with one another and influence one another. So because of that a surgeon can change my conscious inner life by opening my skull and giving me shocks in my brain, does not defeat idealism at all. It only seems to do so because we have this entrenched tendency to think in this Cartesian way, in this dualistic way. And yeah, it's a cultural artifact. And how to overcome this? There is only way to overcome this. And I tell you what it is. It's insistence. It's repetition. It's keeping on repeating the same explanation, the same clarification, the same message over and over and over again, until people really internalize it, and it then is absorbed into their intuitive self, and then it becomes intuitive for them. Then they get it. They get it. They see it without needing a conceptual explanation for it. But we are still a few decades away from that.
All right. Um, Thank you for the question, Canadian Catholic. So we have about maybe 10 minutes left, so we can maybe get to a couple more questions before we wrap up, if that's okay with you, Bernardo.
Sure, and we can do this again. I don't want to do it for longer than 2 hours. I still have to have dinner, and I and I will soon need a bio break. So I think
Okay.
let's wrap it up this time in 2 hours. But whoever still has questions, maybe we can collect the questions, not lose them, not delete them, and then we can do this again in a month or two.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people here who would be happy to do this again at some point. Um, that would be awesome. So we have a question from J7300, and they ask, "Hello, Dr. Kastrup. What is your general view of F.H. Bradley's absolute idealism and deriving idealism by rejecting the distinction between objects and their properties, and namely internal and external relations, as Bradley did in his book Appearance and Reality?"
I do not know enough about Bradley's idealism to comment intelligent on this, and I recognize it's a gap in my knowledge. I am perfectly happy to be bashed because of this, but I cannot comment intelligently on this. Not intelligently enough for me to dare do that, so I will not comment on it.
Okay, that's fine. We can just move on to another question. Lucas had a question about identity. He asks, under your metaphysics, is the notion of identity simply a configuration of consciousness?
Identity is a form of experience. Your sense of identity is just that, a sense. Um, and that sense can be evoked by a narrative of personal identity. In other words, a story you tell yourself about who or what you are. If you drill down enough into all stories of personal identity, you will find that they are all incoherent at the end. You will find their holes, their gaps, their internal contradictions at some point. Um, for instance, if you think that you are this body or your DNA or your personal history, You have a hard time explaining to yourself why you feel that you are the same person now as you were when you were 1 day old. Not a single atom in your body back then is exactly the same or has remained in your body until now. Some of them could have left your body and returned. Statistically, that certainly happened. But your body is certainly not the same. It's never the same. It's changing all the time. You may say, "Well, I'm my DNA." Okay, then you are your twin brother too, right? Well, clearly you're not. So you cannot be that either. So you can play this game with you and you in your own mind, and you find out that if you see past the narratives of personal identity, your deepest and truest sense of identity, which is an experience, is core subjectivity, is the I that experiences, the I that sees, not any of the contents of the seeing, not any particular thing that is seen, but the I that sees, that pure subjectivity within which experiences arise, different experiences. And what is that identity, that felt, bare, core, primordial, I feel tempted to use this German word that I love, this Ur identity, this primordial sense of identity that is naked, undressed up by culture, undressed up by language, by narratives. That sense of identity is an experience. And it is also the cradle of all other experiences, the foundation for all other experiences. So you could call it the primary experience, the foundation of the entire edifice of experiences. And it is universal consciousness itself. If you need to know what universal consciousness is, it is that naked, undressed sense of self, sense of subjectivity, core subjectivity.
All right. Well, we're pretty much at the 2 hour mark here. Do you want to wrap it up there? Do you want to
It's
um,
3 minutes to 10 for me, so I'll take one more question.
one more question? Okay, that's what we'll do. So a logical consequence of the reductionist framework that you employ is that the fundamental constituents of reality, i.e. your ontological primitive as consciousness, cannot be explained in terms of anything else. Therefore, if mind at large were to become self-aware, then regardless of its intelligence, it would still face the mystery of its own existence. Can you comment on this?
That's entirely right. Yeah. The nature of a correct choice of ontological primitive is that you are then able to explain everything else in terms of it, but you can never explain it itself. And the reason for that is that you do not have a reference point, an outside reference point, in terms of which to establish any contrast. And to say what something you perforce need to say what it is not. To say what it is to say what it is not. And you cannot say what universal consciousness is not, because there is nothing it is not. And therefore, you can never say what it is, even if universal consciousness, in some cosmological point in the future, would become fully metacognizant. Um, it would still suffer from the itch of not being able to truly say what it is. But at the same time, the very question may not make sense at all, because the question arises in a context of diversity, of differences. It's only in that context that the question itself has any meaning. So when you try to apply the same question in a context where there is no diversity, where there is no distinction, all there is whatever there is, the question itself loses meaning. It's the wrong question to ask. It doesn't make sense to ask. So I don't know what, no, in that thought, imaginary thought exercise, I don't know whether mind at large or universal consciousness would understand that the question has no meaning and therefore be in complete peace in its full metacognition, or whether it would still have a niche and say, "Oh, darn it, I really need to know what is it that I am." I don't know what of these two things would happen. I don't know.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Kastrup. Would you like to, do you have anything to promote, like any upcoming books or papers or anything like that that you want to that you want to
No, you
mention?
guys can always go to my website to see the latest. I wanted to say this. I'm surprised with the quality of the questions, and the quality has been a lot higher than I thought they would be. So kudos to you guys. You've done a pretty good job. Thanks a lot.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. We'd love to do this again sometime. Thanks everyone else for coming as well. This has been great, and hope you have a great night, Bernardo.
Thank you. You guys too. Take care.
You too.
Bye now.